Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Sarah Martinez sat in the far corner, her uniform crisp, her posture straight, her hands resting quietly in her lap. She had logged more hours than half the men in the room combined. She had studied every manual, practiced every procedure, lived every lesson the academy could throw at her. But here, among the chatter of voices, she was invisible. It wasn't new. She had grown up that way, always present, always prepared, but rarely seen. Her father, a mechanic who spent long nights under the belly of fighter jets, taught her that true skill didn't need to shout. Her mother, a Navy nurse who'd whispered prayers over broken soldiers, showed her that real courage didn't need applause. Sarah had carried both lessons in silence, building herself into someone who could stand steady when others faltered. But silence can weigh heavy, especially when you're surrounded by men who measure worth by noise. At 28, Sarah had flown more than 2,000 hours in aircraft that demanded precision and nerves of steel. She knew what her hands could do on a stick, what her mind could process in a storm of alarms. She had trained in scenarios designed to break people, and she had not broken. Yet, when the other pilots clinked glasses at the officers' club, telling stories of combat sorties and missions turned legend, she was the one at the table who went unheard. She didn't correct them, she didn't need to. Because Sarah knew, the real test hadn't come yet, and when it did, she would not falter. Still in the quiet of her apartment off base, surrounded by books on aviation and model aircraft from her childhood, the questions lingered. Would she ever get the chance? Or would her career fade into the background, support roles, overlooked flights, invisible contributions? Her life was simple. Morning runs before dawn, hours with the ground crews learning the mechanics of engines, evenings reviewing flight manuals like they were scripture. She had no interest in proving herself at the bar. Her interest lay in the skis, in the silence between heartbeats when decisions meant life or death. But opportunity, when it came, rarely knocked politely. It shattered the morning. At 4:07, the alarm tore through the stillness of Naval Air Station. The voice over the loudspeaker was urgent, harder than anything she had heard in her years of service. It cut through her pre-flight inspection, jolting her heart as if the ground itself had shifted. All available personnel, report to main briefing room immediately. Repeat, all personnel, main briefing room. She froze for a half-second, her hand resting on the cold fuselage of her aircraft. Then instinct took over. She secured the inspection, tightened her flight jacket, and ran. The air smelled of jet fuel and salt from the Atlantic, the sound of boots pounding pavement echoing around her. She had no idea what waited behind those doors, only that the tone of that voice meant lives already hung in the balance. When she entered, the room was thick with tension. Sailors, Marines, aviators, faces drawn, voices hushed. At the front stood Captain James Hawke, the most seasoned SEAL team leader on base. His presence alone silenced the room. The man was carved from battle, his weathered face the map of someone who had lived through too many missions where not everyone came home. He spread classified documents across the podium with hands that, for once, trembled. Behind him, the satellite projection flickered onto the screen. A mountainous region, dense forests splitting into narrow valleys, a clearing with wreckage, barely visible yet unmistakable. A downed helicopter. His voice came low, steady, but laced with something Sarah had never heard in him before, a crack of urgency. A Navy transport went down 6 hours ago. A team of combat engineers, 4 alive, trapped. A ripple of unease swept through the room. 60 miles behind enemy lines, he continued. Surrounded, insurgent forces closing in, anti-aircraft weapons already positioned on the ridges. Rescue choppers won't make it through. Ground forces too slow. We've got hours, maybe less, before they're overrun or taken. Silence heavy, unrelenting. Sarah's pulse quickened, her breath slowed. She absorbed every detail, the cliffs, the valleys, the choke points where death would wait. "This mission," said, his voice dropping, "requires a pilot with exceptional skill, someone who can fly low, unseen, through hostile air, in weather that will not forgive mistakes, someone who can find those men, coordinate with our team, and bring them out alive." His eyes swept the room. For a moment, no one moved. Sarah felt her chest tighten. This was it. This was the test. The reason for all the nights spent in simulators when others were asleep. The reason she had studied terrain maps and memorized emergency procedures until her eyes ached. But fear pressed in just as hard as the possibility. Fear that stepping forward would mean ridicule. Fear that one mistake, one hesitation, would confirm every doubt whispered behind her back. She looked around. The other pilots shifted in their seats, men with more flight hours, men with combat stripes sewn into their uniforms, but she saw it in their eyes: hesitation, the kind that kills missions before they start. The room waited. Then Captain asked the question that would hang in her memory forever. "I need to know, right now, if there is a combat pilot here who has the skill and the courage to attempt this mission." The silence was suffocating. Sarah's hands trembled slightly against her thighs, not from fear, from decision, from the weight of everything her life had led to pressing against this single moment. She stood. The scrape of her chair against the floor was deafening in the quiet room. Heads turned. Dozens of eyes bore into her, questioning, judging, dismissing. A woman, slight in frame, daring to rise when others did not. His eyes narrowed, not in doubt but in calculation. Recognition flickered. He had seen her before, on the flight line, meticulous, precise. A pilot who treated aircraft like living things. But the colonel spoke first, his tone sharp with skepticism. "Lieutenant Martinez, are you certain you understand what this entails?" The whispers started. Low, biting: "She's too young, not enough combat time," reckless, desperate. Sarah lifted her chin, steadying her voice with every ounce of the discipline she had built across years of silence. "Sir, I have over 2,000 hours in low-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, advanced combat maneuvering, hostile territory navigation. I know the risks, and I know I have the skills to execute this mission." No boast, no bravado, just truth. The room stilled again, studied her, not just her words, but the quiet assurance behind them. He had known men who talked louder, promised more, then folded in the heat of fire. She did not talk loud. She simply stood. He leaned forward. "Lieutenant, this isn't training. You'll be flying alone. Hostile forces will hear you before they see you. They've shot down better pilots in better conditions. Are you absolutely certain you're prepared?" Sarah didn't blink. "Captain," she said softly, "those 4 crew members don't have time for doubt. I know the terrain. I know the aircraft. I can do this." The room erupted in whispers again, some scoffing, some grudging respect. A senior pilot pushed forward, volunteering himself instead, his chest full of medals, his voice full of experience. But when Sarah stepped to the front, pointing at the satellite image, tracing ridges and valleys with her finger, her words cut through the noise. She laid out her plan, calm, thorough, tactical, the way she would ride the ridge lines, using terrain to mask her approach, the way the winds could be turned into an advantage rather than an enemy, the backup routes if conditions shifted, the contingencies if fire erupted from the ridges. The more she spoke, the quieter the room grew. By the time she finished, his eyes had changed. The colonel's too. The skepticism softened, replaced by something heavier: respect. His decision came fast. "Lieutenant Martinez, you have the mission. Wheels up in 2 hours." The words landed like a hammer in Sarah's chest. She didn't flinch. She didn't celebrate. She only nodded, already shifting her mind into preparation. Because she knew 2 hours would pass in a blur. And when the wheels left the runway, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. What does a pilot think about when the clock is ticking down toward a mission that might end her life? For Sarah, it wasn't death, It was failure. 2 hours. That's what had given her. 2 hours to absorb the full weight of a mission others wouldn't touch. 2 hours to prepare herself, her aircraft, her mind, for what lay ahead. And somehow it already felt like time was running out. She didn't waste a second. The hangar buzzed with motion, mechanics rushing equipment, radios alive with clipped orders, soldiers gathering gear for the ground approach. But Sarah's world shrank to a single axis, her aircraft. She walked the length of the stripped-down reconnaissance plane, her eyes scanning every seam, every rivet, every control surface as though her life was stitched into the metal itself. In a way, it was. Chief Petty Officer, grease still clinging to his fingers, stood waiting with a clipboard. He had been working these aircraft longer than most pilots had been flying. To him, Sarah was different. Not many pilots respected the language of engines the way she did. She listened when a plane spoke. She didn't force, didn't rush. She learned. "You're really going," he muttered, though it wasn't a question. Sarah gave a quiet nod. Exhaled through his teeth, then flipped a page on the clipboard. "Engine compression checks out. Fuel consumption's borderline, you'll be tight on reserves. Modified nav system is calibrated, but she'll fight you in crosswinds. Don't get careless." "I never do," Sarah answered softly. He looked at her, studied her really. For a second his hardened face softened, and then he thrust the clipboard into her hand. "She'll carry you, if you carry her." Sarah signed the sheet with steady fingers, even though her chest was tight. It wasn't fear exactly. More like the realization that once the ink dried, there was no pulling back. Inside the briefing room, the intel officers spread more satellite imagery across the table. Weather models, radio intercepts, patrol routes marked with red ink. Sarah bent over the maps, memorizing each valley, each ridge line, each possible shadow she could use to hide herself in hostile air. Captain leaned over her shoulder. His voice was low, calm, but urgent. "We'll move in from the South Ridge. We'll be blind without your eyes. You lose comms, you improvise. But don't break radio discipline unless it's life or death. They'll be listening." Sarah gave a slight nod. Understood. His eyes lingered on her. He had seen hundreds of operators, brash, cocky, loud. She wasn't any of those things, which strangely gave him more faith in her than he expected. The meteorologist arrived with bad news. Cloud ceilings dropping fast, gusts pushing east at 20 knots, thunderstorms by afternoon. Perfect conditions for an accident. Sarah traced alternate routes across the map with her finger. "If visibility closes in, I'll have to ride instruments until the valley breaks." "Fuel's already tight," the colonel reminded her. "I know," Sarah replied. Her tone was quiet, but it silenced him. She had thought this through already, 100 times in her mind. When the officers cleared out, Sarah remained, staring at the images until her vision blurred. Somewhere out there, 4 men were alive because fate had not yet chosen to end them. Somewhere out there they were waiting, bleeding, hiding, praying for a pilot they didn't even know existed. And she was it. The thought should have shaken her. Instead, it steadied her. She rose, smoothed her uniform, and walked out into the hangar again. The aircraft sat waiting on the line, its matte surface catching the dim light of dawn. To others it looked stripped, vulnerable, too light, too exposed for hostile skis. To Sarah it looked ready. Like a predator stripped lean for speed, built for agility, not comfort. She walked around it slowly, running her fingers over the skin of the wings, the curve of the fuselage. Every touch was both ritual and farewell. Her heart was quiet, but her mind hummed with fragments of thought. Her father's voice, telling her that machines don't lie, they tell you what they need if you listen. Her mother's words, whispered in hospital wards, reminding her that courage is never loud. Courage is quiet. And that's what Sarah carried with her now. Colonel Henderson arrived at the edge of the tarmac. His face was stern, but his eyes gave him away. Doubt had been replaced with something else. Not trust, not quite, but the awareness that she was their only chance. "Lieutenant," he said, "you have full authorization. Don't mistake that for pressure, just come back." She saluted, no words, there was nothing to say. Approached, handing her a final checklist. His voice was rough but low enough for only her to hear. "When she shakes, don't fight it, flow with her, like you always do." Sarah gave him the faintest smile. Then she climbed into the cockpit. The seat felt like home. The harness clicked into place. Her hands moved through the pre-start checklist, each action automatic, drilled into her through years of repetition. Battery on, fuel pumps engaged, navigation set, survival gear checked. She touched each control like it was a prayer. Engines roared to life. The vibrations rattled through her chest, but instead of fear, she felt focus sharpening inside her. The modified bird responded to her touch with just the right sensitivity. Ground control crackled in her ear. "Lieutenant Martinez cleared for immediate takeoff. Godspeed." She taxied forward. The runway stretched ahead, a strip of black cutting into gray dawn. From the tower watched. His jaw was clenched. He had led men into impossible situations before, but watching her climb into that plane stirred something different. Respect, yes. Worry, of course. But also the strange sense that this mission, this pilot, was about to rewrite the expectations of everyone on this base. Sarah reached the center line. She paused for a breath, her eyes steady on the horizon. Somewhere out there, men waited. Somewhere out there, the world had already counted her out. She wrapped her fingers around the throttle. "Let's see if silence can fly." Engines screamed as she pushed forward. The plane surged, wheels hammering against the runway. Faster, faster. The vibration shook through her bones, but she held steady. At 140 knots, she lifted. The ground dropped away. The base shrank behind her. Ahead lay nothing but storm, mountains, and hostile fire. Sarah Martinez disappeared into the sky. How low can a pilot fly before the earth itself becomes an enemy? Sarah skimmed just above the treetops, the aircraft shuddering each time the wind shifted through the valleys. The ground raced beneath her like a blur of green and gray. Every second demanded calculation: altitude, airspeed, wind direction, fuel burn. Every second whispered of disaster, waiting one mistake away. She knew the boundary of hostile territory the way a soldier knows the edge of a minefield. One breath you were safe, the next you were prey. As she crossed that invisible line, her hand steadied against the throttle. Her heartbeat slowed. Training overrode instinct. Fly the plane, trust the math, trust the machine. But she also trusted herself. The modified reconnaissance bird responded with agility, dipping and rolling in harmony with the terrain. To an untrained pilot, this altitude was suicide. To Sarah, it was survival. Every ridge line masked her presence from enemy radar. Every sudden valley gave her cover from eyes on the ground. She flew like water finding its way downhill, fluid, silent, unyielding. Radio contact with base fractured as the mountains swallowed signal. Static hissed in her ear, broken by clipped updates that dissolved before meaning could take shape. Alone. That's what it felt like now. Just her and the machine, threading a labyrinth where failure meant no second chances. She glanced at the clock. Fuel burn was on schedule. Good. But the margin was razor thin. One detour, one wrong turn, and she'd be cutting it too close to make it home. She pushed the thought away. She couldn't afford what-ifs. The valleys closed in. Gray clouds pressed lower, turning daylight into twilight. Visibility shrank. Her instruments became lifelines, altimeter, artificial horizon, navigation system blinking its cold reassurance. But she couldn't trust the screens alone. In this kind of flying, instruments lied. Trees didn't. Rocks didn't. One glance outside told her if she'd live or die in the next heartbeat. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Machines are honest if you listen, but they'll kill you if you forget they're flawed. She kept listening, to the hum of the engine, to the vibration in the yoke, to the pitch of the wind clawing past the canopy. Every detail told a story. The first shot came without warning. Tracer fire streaked upward from a hidden ridge, red lines slicing through gray. Her body reacted faster than thought, yoke hard left, throttle wide. The aircraft rolled, stomach pressed against her ribs, trees blurring past in a rush of green and shadow. She could feel the heat of rounds crackling the air around her. The modified bird groaned but held. Sarah leveled out just above the canopy, breath tight but steady. Enemy fire already, which meant they had been listening, waiting. Her pulse surged, but her hands didn't shake. Instead, her mind sharpened into that space she had always trusted, the space where fear had no voice. She banked wide, circling back just enough to spot the flash of muzzle fire hidden in the ridge. Coordinates locked. She marked them in her mind, feeding the data into her comms. Eagle 1 enemy position, grid 26, ridge line east. Static swallowed her words. She cursed it under her breath. Maybe got it, maybe not, but she couldn't linger. She pushed lower, weaving through the terrain like a shadow. The trick was to stay unpredictable, never straight, never level, use the land as armor. Minutes blurred into miles. Sweat gathered at her hairline beneath the helmet. She stole glances at the fuel gauge, still good, but dropping in increments that felt faster than the seconds ticking away. She thought of the men waiting, 4 lives hanging by threads in a valley like this one. Did they even know help was coming? Did they think the Navy had already written them off? Sarah gritted her teeth, not on her watch. Clouds thickened, swallowing ridges in gray. She had to trust her instincts more than her eyes now. She angled the aircraft through a narrow pass, wings barely clear of the rock on either side. One gust, one twitch, and she'd be scattered across the mountains like the helicopter she was trying to reach. Her stomach knotted, but her hands stayed calm. Every adjustment small, precise. Too much and she'd into death. Too little and she'd bleed altitude into the ground. She whispered to herself, voice low in the cockpit, "Flow with it, don't fight it." The valley widened again, spilling into dense forest. For a moment the danger eased. She let herself breathe just once before the radio crackled alive. "Pilot, do you copy? This is ground team moving north ridge. Enemy patrols increasing. Advise." The sound of his voice steadied her like nothing else could. She pressed transmit. "Copy, Eagle 1 in hostile air. Contact made. Heavy fire from Ridge 26. Recommend avoid eastern approach." Static clawed the edges of the words, but she heard his reply through the haze. "Understood. Keep eyes on target area. Survivors still dark." Still dark, no signal from the down crew. Sarah's throat tightened. She imagined them, injured, hidden, listening for rotors that hadn't come. What if she was too late? What if they were already gone? She shoved the thought aside. Doubt was poison, focus was survival. The minutes stretched, each one heavier than the last. She scanned the canopy below, eyes darting for unnatural shapes. A reflection, a break in the trees, smoke, anything. Her gut told her she was close. And then, gunfire erupted again, this time closer. Tracers arced up from the valley floor, cutting across her flight path. She yanked the yoke, the aircraft lurching sideways, engine screaming as she pulled into a climb. Gravity crushed against her chest, vision tunneling at the edges. Rounds snapped past her canopy, one striking close enough to jolt the fuselage. The sound rattled her teeth. But the bird held, and so did she. She rolled out low, pushing through the valley until the fire thinned behind her. Her breathing was sharp now, but not panicked. If anything, it was anger. Anger that time was bleeding away. Anger that every minute spent dodging bullets was a minute the survivors might not have. She gripped the yoke, eyes scanning, scanning. And then her radio came alive again. Weak, broken, but clear enough to shatter the silence. "Mayday, survivors crash site, code Sierra 4, Valley North." Her heart lurched. They were alive. The signal was faint, distorted, but real. The survivors had managed to repair their emergency radio, guiding her with fractured words. Valley North. Landmarks she recognized. Sarah's chest tightened, not with fear now but with something sharper, hope. She adjusted course, pushing the aircraft toward the coordinates, the forest below blurring faster as she closed in. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the green, were men waiting for her. But the valley they named was narrow, exposed, a killing box. If she went in, she'd be a target. Her hand hovered over the throttle. The decision was hers. What makes a pilot dive into a valley she knows could kill her? Sarah eased the nose down, following the survivors' broken radio signal into terrain that looked less like sanctuary and more like a trap carved by nature itself. Steep ridges rose on either side, jagged walls of stone that funneled her into a narrow corridor. No room to climb, no room to turn, just a straight shot that left her exposed to anyone waiting with a weapon. But if she didn't go in, the men would die. Her eyes swept the gauges, cross-checking altitude and airspeed. The modified reconnaissance plane shivered in the gusts, wings trembling like a bird forced into a storm. She tightened her grip on the yoke. Stay steady, stay low. Every instinct screamed at her to pull up, to break off, to preserve herself. But her conscience whispered louder. 4 lives are waiting, and you are the only one coming. The first hint of wreckage appeared in slivers, a glint of twisted metal barely visible through the canopy. Sarah banked hard, circling wide to get a better angle. There it was. The downed helicopter sprawled across a small clearing, trees crushed under its weight, debris scattered like bones. Smoke curled faintly from the wreck, not enough to betray its location to distant eyes, but enough to mark it for hers. Her breath hitched. She had found them. She leveled the aircraft, flying a tight circle above the valley. Her headset crackled with voice, faint but firm. Eagle 1, this is Viper Team. Confirm crash site located. Sarah keyed her mic, voice calm despite the adrenaline hammering in her veins. Confirmed. Survivors present. Coordinates inbound. Enemy presence heavy on eastern ridge. Avoid approach from that vector. Static chewed at the edges of the transmission, but reply cut through. Copy. We're moving. Keep eyes on us. Sarah swept the valley again, her sensors mapping shapes against terrain. She spotted movement, small clusters of enemy fighters weaving through the forest below. They were converging, tightening a noose around the crash site. The trapped crew didn't have hours. They barely had minutes. Her radio crackled again, a faint, desperate voice. One of the survivors. This is Sierra 4, injuries sustained, ammo low, insurgents closing in. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to answer, to reassure, but she couldn't waste words. Instead, she dipped lower, bringing her aircraft close enough to the tree line that the roar of her engine would echo into the clearing, a message in itself. You are not forgotten. Help is here. She banked sharply, tracing the ridges with her eyes. Enemy patrols were setting ambushes along the obvious routes. She saw flashes of muzzle fire hidden beneath the trees, rifles and heavier weapons dragged into position. Her sensors picked up the telltale shimmer of anti-air emplacements. Her jaw clenched. If the rescue team walked straight in, they'd never make it. She keyed her mic. Viper Team, multiple hostile positions detected along south approach. Reroute West Ridge, use the draw as cover. I'll mark targets. Understood, replied, no hesitation. He trusted her eyes. Sarah circled, watching the dance unfold below. She fed coordinates, flagged enemy movement, directed some men toward shadows that offered cover. Her words were clipped, efficient. But inside, she felt the storm building. Every second a gamble, every second a test of whether she could keep them all alive. And then the sky betrayed her. Rotor noise, low, heavy, growing closer. Enemy helicopters. Her blood ran cold. The insurgents weren't just hunting on the ground anymore. They had taken to the air. She scanned the horizon, spotting 2 dark shapes cresting the far ridge. Their silhouettes cut through the mist, ugly and predatory. armed, faster than her stripped-down bird, designed for killing, not surviving. Her fingers tightened on the controls. She couldn't fight them. Her plane wasn't built for combat. One pass from their cannons and she'd be nothing but falling wreckage. But if she fled, the survivors would be trapped, team exposed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind snapped into the clarity she trusted most. Don't fight the storm, flow with it. She nosed the aircraft lower, weaving back into the valley, using the ridges as shields. Her sensors tracked the helicopters, their signatures closing fast. She transmitted quickly, voice sharp. Viper team, enemy air inbound. 2 birds. Stay concealed until I divert. Reply came through the crackle. Copy, do not engage. She almost laughed at the obviousness of the order. Engage in this bird. No, but she could outthink them, outfly them. The helicopters thundered closer, their rotors beating the air like war drums. Sarah hugged the terrain, the trees whipping by so close she could almost count their branches. Her stomach clenched as she banked through another narrow cut, the fuselage skimming dangerously close to the cliffside. Behind her, the enemy birds searched, their shadows sweeping the valley. Sarah forced her breathing slow. She couldn't let panic dictate her hands. Every move had to be deliberate. She darted through another pass, doubling back just enough to throw off pursuit. The trick wasn't to run, it was to vanish, to make herself a ghost among the ridges. Still, the sound of their rotors clawed at her nerves. They were hunting, and she was the prey. She keyed her mic, her voice low but steady. Viper team, continue advance. I'll maintain aerial overwatch. Survivors still secure. Roger that, answered. But Sarah could hear it in his tone, the weight of knowing she was up there alone, drawing fire so his men could move unseen. Her hands trembled for the first time since takeoff, not from fear of dying but from the razor's edge she was balanced on. If she failed, if she faltered, it wouldn't just be her life lost. It would be all of them. She closed her eyes for half a second, long enough to hear her mother's voice from memory. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Sarah. It's moving anyway. Her eyes opened, clear, focused. She banked hard, pushing the aircraft into another narrow gorge, rotor noise echoing like thunder behind her. The helicopters were closing. How long can one pilot outfly machines designed to kill her? The helicopters thundered above the valley, their rotors slapping the air like war hammers. Sarah could feel the pressure in her chest with every beat, as though the sky itself was shaking her ribs. They were hunting, sweeping back and forth, searching for the sound of her engine, the flash of her wings against rock. She pushed lower, hugging the terrain so tight that branches scraped the underside of her fuselage. The altimeter needles quivered dangerously close to zero. Any lower and she'd be skimming soil instead of air. But lower meant hidden. Lower meant alive. The radio hissed with its voice, clipped and urgent. Eagle 1 status. Her breath was calm, but her throat was tight. Still airborne, enemy air overhead, holding concealment. Keep them busy, my team's advancing. Busy, she almost laughed. They weren't dogs to be distracted, they were wolves, armed and relentless, but she knew her role. Her hands gripped the yoke, sweat slick under her gloves. She couldn't fight, but she could outthink. The first helicopter appeared through the mist, its shape monstrous against the ridge. Its nose dipped, hunting for movement. Sarah banked sharply, pulling her bird into a cut between rocks barely wide enough for her wingspan. The aircraft groaned, wings flexing as if in protest. Tracer rounds erupted behind her, streaks of red slashing past. She felt one strike near the tail, the jolt rattling her bones. Instinct screamed to climb, to flee. She stayed low, always low. The valley turned, and she turned with it, weaving like a shadow. The helicopter overshot, banking wide, its engines roaring as it looped back. Sarah whispered under her breath, a habit she had carried since flight school. Flow with it, flow with it. She darted through another canyon, trusting memory more than instruments. She knew this terrain from the satellite maps, but the reality was sharper. Rocks lunged out of the fog, trees snapped close against her wings. Each second was a knife edge. Above, the enemy's second helicopter appeared, sweeping across the ridge like a hawk. They were bracketing her now, one on each side, cutting off escape. Her pulse spiked. This was the trap. She glanced at her fuel gauge, still dropping. The margin was razor-thin already, and these evasions were burning precious minutes. If she couldn't lose them soon, she'd run dry before making it home. Her mind raced. She couldn't fight, couldn't outrun, but maybe, just maybe, she could disappear. She pulled hard right, diving into a gorge where clouds pooled thick like smoke. Instruments jittered, altimeter bouncing, visibility near zero. She trusted instinct, not glass. The aircraft sliced into the fog, swallowed whole. Above, rotor thunder rumbled, confused, circling. The helicopters searched, but the gorge was narrow, twisted, a labyrinth even for hunters. Sarah cut throttle slightly, reducing noise, gliding through the mist like a phantom. Her breath was shallow, every nerve alive. One wrong move, one cliff face unseen, and she'd shatter into oblivion. But her gut told her this was the only way. Minutes crawled, rotor noise faded, shifted, circled away. They had lost her. For the first time since entering hostile skis, Sarah allowed herself one sharp exhale, a tremor shaking loose from her chest. Not victory, not yet. Survival for now. Her radio crackled, voice sharp. Eagle 1, report. Still airborne, she replied, voice even. Enemy air diverted. You're clear for approach West Ridge. Survivors still holding position. There was a pause, then his reply steadier. Copy, keep eyes on. Sarah adjusted course, rising slightly to regain view of the valley. The crash site came back into sight, twisted wreckage surrounded by thick trees. Through her sensors, she spotted faint movement, 4 figures huddled near the wreck, rifles weakly braced, bodies slumped with exhaustion, still alive, still fighting. But enemy forces were closing. She marked positions, insurgents moving in small groups, leapfrogging through the forest, tightening their circle. Their discipline chilled her. These weren't random patrols. This was a coordinated kill. She transmitted quickly. Viper team, multiple contacts converging north of crash site. You'll need to cross open ground. Recommend wait until I confirm movement. Negative's voice replied. We're on timeline, survivors won't hold. Give us their perimeter. Sarah scanned again, her heart hammering. She fed coordinates, marking ambush points, sniper nests, concealed firing lanes. Each detail mattered. If she missed one, men would walk into death. Her hands trembled now, but not from the yoke, from the weight of it. She was their eyes, their only shield. The ground team advanced, shadows slipping between trees, their movement invisible except from above. Sarah kept circling, her aircraft dipping low enough to see the shimmer of weapons catching stray sunlight. Every loop burned fuel, every pass risked detection, but she couldn't leave them blind. A burst of gunfire erupted near the crash site. Enemy patrols had reached the clearing. The survivors returned fire, desperate, uneven. Smoke rose where bullets sparked against metal. Sarah's chest clenched. She wanted to scream at the distance, at the helplessness of being above when they bled below. But she held steady, circling, transmitting calmly. Viper team, contact east side of clearing. Survivors pinned. Copy, said, his voice carried steel. We're moving in. Through her canopy, Sarah caught glimpses of his team flanking wide, slipping through cover she had marked. They moved like ghosts, silent and coordinated. She fed them updates, every enemy shift flagged, every movement tracked. But her fuel gauge dipped lower, dangerously low. Each second she spent overhead was another she might not get home. She ignored it. Her responsibility wasn't return. It was to hold the line long enough for to reach those men. Her stomach knotted, her body aching from the strain of constant vigilance. Yet she pressed on, eyes locked, voice steady, circling the valley like a guardian tethered to those below. And then she saw them. Men breaking through the tree line, less than 100 yards from the wreckage. The survivors, heads lifted, desperate hope sparking in their faces even through her sensors. But so did the enemy. Dozens now, converging from 3 sides drawn by the firefight. Outnumbered. His team would be swallowed if they weren't careful. Sarah's heart pounded as she banked hard, circling wider to catch every angle. She marked movement, flagged ambushes, pushed her voice into the comms with an edge sharper than steel. Viper team, multiple hostiles inbound North Ridge. Recommend immediate suppression. Survivors exposed. His reply was curt. Copy, engaging. Gunfire erupted below, echoing through the valley. The fight had begun. Sarah circled overhead, fuel bleeding away, eyes locked on the chaos below. His team was closing. The survivors were holding. But the enemy was pressing harder, faster, closing from all sides. She swallowed hard. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. How long can a voice steady men's hands in the chaos of war? Gunfire rattled the valley like thunder tearing through stone. From above, Sarah saw flashes of muzzle fire streak through the trees, sharp bursts that shattered the mist. The survivors at the wreckage were pinned, huddled against the twisted metal of their downed helicopter, returning fire with what little ammunition they had left. His team moved like shadows, fanning out from the western ridge, but the enemy was already closing in. Groups of fighters pressed from the north and east, their movements disciplined, their intent merciless. Sarah's aircraft circled low, the modified engines groaning under the strain of tight banking. The fuel gauge quivered just below the line she had marked in her mind as danger, but her voice on the radio came calm, measured. Viper team, enemy squad repositioning north flank, 50 meters using tree cover. Adjust 2 clicks east, you'll flank their blind side. Copy, replied. The tone of his voice carried no doubt, no hesitation. He trusted her completely now. From above, Sarah saw it unfold. His men shifting silently, rifles raised, the ambush turned back on the ambushers. A brief flash of fire and the insurgents went down. His team advanced. Her body trembled slightly from the strain of constant vigilance, her eyes darting between canopy and gauges, sensors and horizon. She hadn't taken a real breath in minutes, but she couldn't pause, not now. Her radio crackled again, weak, desperate. One of the survivors. This is Sierra 4, ammo nearly gone, casualties, please hurry. Sarah's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to reassure, but reassurance without action was worthless. So instead, she banked lower, pushing her bird into the valley until the roar of her engines washed over the clearing. You are not alone, hold on. Bullets reached for her again, tracer fire clawing up from the tree line. She yanked the yoke, pulling into a roll so tight her ribs screamed against the harness. The plane groaned, wings flexing, but held. The voice in her head whispered coldly, "Fuel's burning faster than you can spare." She ignored it. "Viper team," she transmitted through clenched teeth. "Enemy machine gun nest, eastern ridge, 70 meters from the clearing. If you don't neutralize, survivors will be overrun." Onit's voice snapped back. She circled, banking tight, watching as his men shifted again, cutting through cover, one soldier laying suppressive fire while another maneuvered into position. Seconds later, the heavy gun fell silent. The battlefield moved like a storm beneath her. His team pressed closer, the survivors clinging to life. Every decision she made, every call she gave, tilted the balance between salvation and disaster. Her hands ached from gripping the controls. Sweat stung her eyes, but her voice remained steel. Then through the haze she saw one of his men fall. A flash of movement, a burst of fire from a concealed trench she had missed. Her gut dropped, missed it, my fault. She banked hard, scanning, marking the trench, forcing her voice steady even as guilt pressed against her throat. Contact, Trench at survivors 9 o'clock. Suppress now. Gunfire answered from men. The trench went silent, but the image of the fallen soldier burned into her mind. She couldn't see if he was alive, couldn't know if her oversight had cost him. For a heartbeat, the weight nearly broke her. The voices of doubt she'd silenced for years roared back. She doesn't belong. She's not ready. She'll get people killed. Her hands trembled on the yoke. But then she heard his voice, sharp and unyielding. Eagle One, your eyes are keeping us alive. Stay with me. It steadied her, not absolution, not forgiveness, but trust she couldn't betray. She tightened her grip, forcing the tremor out of her hands. Focus returned. The survivors were still holding. Barely. His team had cut the distance, but the enemy pressed harder, like wolves sensing prey slipping away. Sarah's bird shuddered as she forced another tight turn, sensors catching new movement on the ridge. Viper team, multiple hostiles, northwest ridge, closing fast. 5, maybe 6. If they breach, survivors are done. Understood, shot back. We'll intercept. Through her canopy, she saw them move. Saw a squad sprint through fire, trading their own safety for speed, cutting across open ground she would never dare traverse on foot. She clenched her jaw, willing them forward, whispering to herself as if her words could carry to them. Go, faster, just a little faster. Gunfire lit the clearing again. The survivors were down to their last rounds, their rifles clattering empty. Sarah's stomach twisted. She could almost hear their desperation in the silence that followed each pull of the trigger. Her radio crackled weakly. Sierra 4, we're out, God, we're out. Sarah dipped her nose, swooping lower, engines roaring over the wreckage. Not a weapon, not a rescue, but a promise. Hold on, they're coming. She keyed her mic, her voice steady, strong, even though her throat burned. Survivors, this is Eagle One. Hold position. Help is meters away. She didn't know if they believed. She only knew they heard her. And sometimes that was enough. Below's team burst through the tree line, rifles barking, precision and fury clearing the final gap. They reached the wreckage, dropping into defensive positions, pulling the wounded crew into their arms. Sarah's chest swelled, relief striking so sharp it almost hurt. They weren't safe yet, but the link had been made. The impossible gap closed. Her fuel gauge blinked red, critical. Her body knew what that meant. Every pilot did. It meant time is gone. It meant choose between return or remain. Her rational mind screamed at her, pull out, head for home, or you'll never make it back. But when she looked down, saw men lifting the broken survivors, dragging them through smoke and gunfire, she knew the truth. She couldn't leave, not yet. Her voice cut back into the comms, sharp, unwavering. Eagle One holding station until extraction complete. She knew the risk, knew it might mean never seeing base again. But 4 survivors, and every man on's team, still needed her eyes. Her choice was made. What keeps someone in the sky when the tank is nearly dry? Sarah's eyes locked on the fuel gauge as it blinked its warning, a cold red pulse that demanded she turn for home. Every instinct, every lesson drilled into her during training said the same thing. Save the aircraft, save yourself, live to fly another day. But when she looked down at the valley, at its team dragging bloodied survivors through smoke and chaos, she knew the choice had already been made. She wasn't leaving until they were clear. Her radio crackled with its voice, ragged but controlled. Eagle One, we have the package. 4 survivors, heavy resistance, cover our egress. Sarah's reply came low and steady. Copy, stay west of the clearing, hostiles massing East Ridge. I'll direct you through. Her words felt strange in her own ears. Calm, professional. Yet every muscle in her body was trembling, every nerve frayed by exhaustion and the gnawing thought of that red fuel light. Below, the firefight burned hotter. Enemy fighters surged from the tree line, swarming toward the retreating SEALs. Muzzle flashes erupted in the mist, tracers slicing across the clearing. Men laid down disciplined bursts, but they were outnumbered, fighting with wounded dragging on their shoulders. Sarah circled low, eyes scanning every ridge, every shadow. Viper team, contact North Ridge, 3 hostiles moving parallel to your line. Recommend immediate suppression. Copy. She saw the ripple of fire as men pivoted, cutting down the threat before it could flank them. Another sweep of her sensors, another pulse of dread in her chest. Enemy squad moving south, draw 8 fighters closing fast. If they breach, they cut you off. Understood. His voice was calm, but she heard the weight in it. He was counting on her. Without her eyes above, they'd already be dead. Her plane shuddered through another tight turn. Sweat rolled down her temple, stinging her eyes, but she didn't blink. Not once. The ground below looked like a nightmare painted in fire. Men dragging themselves, others covering, all of them exposed. The survivors stumbled, blood on their uniforms, their faces pale with exhaustion and pain. Yet they moved, because Sarah's voice told them the path. Viper team, clear route West Ridge confirmed. 2 enemy scouts ahead, 50 meters, take them fast. She watched through her canopy as point men broke left, engaged, neutralized the threat. The team pushed forward, seconds bought by her directions. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it echo in her ears, but her voice on the radio stayed firm. Continue movement. Ridge line will mask you from north positions. You have 90 seconds before enemy reinforcements crest east side. 90 seconds, that was all she could give them. Her fuel gauge dipped again, needles sliding lower than she thought possible. A bitter thought flickered, I won't make it back, but she shoved it aside. Survival could wait. One of the survivors stumbled, collapsing in the dirt. Sarah's breath caught in her chest as she watched himself drag the man onto his shoulders, his movements unbroken, his pace relentless. The sight cut through her exhaustion. It reminded her why she was still here, why she hadn't pulled away when she had the chance. Not medals, not recognition, but because men like that refused to quit, and she refused to let them. Gunfire erupted again, closer now. Enemy forces had spotted the retreat, charging from the eastern tree line in numbers Sarah hadn't seen before. Dozens, maybe more. Her stomach turned to ice. Team couldn't outfight that, not without cover. She keyed her mic, her voice sharper now. Viper team, break west immediately, full sprint. I'll guide you through. We're exposed, replied. Not for long, Sarah shot back. Trust me. Her eyes scanned the ridge lines, searching for anything, any concealment, any break in terrain. There. A dry creek bed cutting across the slope, just wide enough to hide their movement if they reached it in time. Just 2 clicks south, creek bed ahead, you'll have cover if you move now. No hesitation. Men shifted, dragging survivors through the open, fire snapping around them. Sarah's gut twisted as bullets rained down, but then cover. They dropped into the bed, movement hidden. Relief shuddered through her chest, but only for a second, because the helicopters were back. The distant thump of rotors grew louder, their shadows sliding across the ridges. Sarah's blood froze. Her little bird couldn't fight them, couldn't even be seen by them. She pressed her plane lower, hugging the terrain, whispering under her breath, stay small, stay invisible. Her comms came alive again, calm even as death chased him. Eagle One, we're moving, extraction point in sight, 30 seconds. 30 seconds. She could give them 30 seconds. Her fuel gauge screamed red now. The needle hovered on empty. Every circle she made was borrowed time, borrowed air. She thought of her parents, her father's rough hands stained with oil, teaching her that machines could be trusted if cared for. Her mother's soft voice telling her that courage wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was sacrifice. Her throat tightened, but she forced her breath steady. Viper team, she said, her voice calm as stone, you're clear on western flank. Enemy air moving east. Push now. Through her canopy, she saw them break cover, sprinting toward the extraction point. Last, carrying the wounded, his rifle slung but ready. Behind them, enemy fighters swarmed the clearing, too late. The survivors were going to make it. Sarah's chest ached with something she couldn't name. Relief, pride, sorrow, all at once. Then her engine sputtered. Her eyes snapped to the gauge. Empty, the worst word a pilot could ever see. The base was still miles away. Her voice, still calm, whispered into the radio. Eagle 1 to Viper team. Survivors secure. Proceed to extraction. She didn't add the rest. Didn't say that she might not see home. Didn't say that the bird carrying her had nothing left to give. She just held the yoke steady, eyes fixed on the horizon. Because sometimes courage wasn't about what you said. It was about staying in the sky long enough for others to live. What does a pilot think about when the fuel gauge reads 0? The red light blinked on Sarah's panel, a cruel reminder that she was flying on borrowed air. The modified bird groaned under her grip, every vibration amplified by the knowledge that there was nothing left in the tanks but fumes and faith. She leveled out, hugging the valley one last time, guiding team with her voice until the last syllable left her lips. Then, silence. Her job was done. The survivors were in safe hands. Men would make it home. But would she? The aircraft trembled in the turbulence, the mountains still looming, weather closing in. Her arms ached, her eyes burned from staring too long without blinking, her body cried for rest. She ignored it all. The only thing that mattered now was keeping her bird alive long enough to clear hostile territory. Her headset hissed, then's voice broke through, rough, weighted. Eagle 1, survivors secure. We're moving to, what's your status? Her hand hovered over the transmit switch. What could she say? Critical fuel, unknown return. Instead, she pressed down, her voice even steady. Still airborne, proceeding west. There was a pause, long, then replied softer than before. Copy, see you on the other side. She didn't answer, she couldn't. The mountains pressed close again, fog curling around the ridges like fingers reaching to drag her down. Sarah's mind split between the present and memory. Her father's voice echoed. When the gauges fail, when the math says impossible, trust the machine. Trust yourself. Her mother's voice followed, gentle but firm. Courage is not in the words. It's in the quiet choices no one sees. Her chest tightened. She wanted to see them again. Wanted to tell them that everything they had taught her had carried her here. But the only way to do that was to bring the bird home. The engine sputtered once, coughed like a dying breath. Sarah adjusted the throttle delicately, coaxing, pleading. The aircraft steadied, not strong but steady. She whispered to it under her breath, just a little longer, carry me and I'll carry you. The valley opened into wider terrain. Less cover, but more hope. Base lay somewhere beyond the haze, waiting. If she could make it across the ridges, if the engine gave her just a handful more minutes, she'd see the Atlantic shimmer again. Her hands worked automatically, every muscle locked in discipline. Tiny corrections, delicate pressure, flying not with force but with feel, the way she always had. Time dissolved, minutes bled into eternity. Then on the horizon a flicker, a radar return, the base tower's signal breaking through static. Eagle 1, this is control, we have you on scope, say status. Her throat tightened, she pressed transmit. Low fuel, critical, request immediate priority landing. The reply came fast, urgent. Cleared direct approach, runway 21, emergency crews standing by. Her heart hammered, she was close, so close. But the engine sputtered again, coughing, threatening to die. The nose dipped, airspeed bleeding away. Sarah fought gently, coaxing every ounce from the bird, refusing to yank, refusing to panic. She could almost see his face, hear his warning, when she shakes, don't fight her, flow with her. She flowed, smooth, precise. The coastline broke through the haze at last, the faint shimmer of the ocean. The base runway stretched like a lifeline across gray concrete. Voices filled her headset, controllers, ground crews, urgency layered with fear. Eagle One, you are cleared to land. Winds 210 at 15. You're short on glide. Recommend divert. Divert, there was nowhere to divert, nowhere left to go. Sarah ignored the chatter. Her world narrowed to the runway, the yoke in her hands, the last breath of her engine. The bird coughed again, shuddering violently. She coaxed it down, lowering flaps, balancing drag against lift with the precision of someone who knew machines better than she knew herself. The altimeter wound down. 100 feet. 50. The engine died. Silence roared in its place. The aircraft dropped, but Sarah's hand stayed calm. She flared just above the tarmac, gliding on momentum alone. Wheels slammed hard against the runway, tires screeching. The plane wobbled, shuddered, but held. She was down. Alive. The aircraft coasted to a stop, silence settling in its frame. For a moment, Sarah didn't move. Her chest heaved, her vision blurred. Her body screamed with exhaustion. Then the canopy opened, and voices rushed in. Ground crew, medics, shouts of relief. Was there, his weathered hands gripping the fuselage like he was holding a living thing that had just survived the impossible. Arrived minutes later, dirt and smoke still clinging to him. He climbed onto the wing, his face lined with fatigue, eyes sharp with something more than respect. He looked at her not as a pilot, not as a subordinate, but as the reason 4 men were still alive. "You saved them," he said simply. Sarah shook her head, her voice hoarse. "We saved them." The days that followed blurred, debriefings, reports, commendations she barely heard. News outlets wanted her name, her story. Medals were discussed in rooms she didn't enter. She deflected it all. Because she remembered the silence in the valley, the whispers of her own doubt, the weight of nearly breaking. And she knew the truth. She hadn't been fearless. She had been afraid, terrified. But she had chosen to act anyway. Weeks later, alone again on the flight line at dusk, Sarah walked the rows of aircraft. The sky glowed faint orange, engines quiet, the world at peace for once. She touched the fuselage of the bird she had flown that day, fingers brushing metal still from bullet strikes. Her chest swelled not with pride but with something deeper, a quiet knowing. She thought of the 4 survivors, alive because she had stayed in the sky. She thought of men, whole because she had been their eyes. She thought of the silence that had defined her life, the moments when no one noticed, no one believed. And she realized it was that silence that had carried her through. She didn't need noise. She didn't need applause. She only needed the quiet strength to stand when asked, and the quiet courage to fly when others couldn't. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.